Hello, friends. Great to see you. We're back for another Sunday teaching. My name is Venerable Tarpa. And before we begin, let's take a moment to appreciate our handsome community gathered here today. Today, I feel fortunate to sit as a member of this kind community in the safety and security of like-minded friends, sharing this present moment with others dedicated to the cultivation of goodness. Today, I'm grateful for the direction and support that this community provides, a community worthy of my time and commitment, a community where my efforts have meaning, purpose, and are appreciated. Today, I'm thankful for this community of awakening, a place to gain the knowledge and skills to improve my life, a family, a home, and a sanctuary for all of us seeking refuge from the storm. And let's remember, as conscientious practitioners, we must recognize our responsibility to the world, to strive to live skillfully while helping others to do the same, to strive to live in balance and harmony with nature and others, to strive to gain mastery over our minds and embody our true benevolent nature, to expand our hearts and minds, transcending our shared human limitations, to not intentionally harm sentient life or our planet, to maturely accept and embrace the reality of our situation while striving to improve it. Excuse me, I just wanted to clear my throat. And once again, welcome to our Sunday teaching. Today we are teaching on a requested topic of patience. Our dear friend Darcy wanted a little bit of advice on patience, so I thought, hey, that's a great topic. So anyways, before we start talking about patience, why not start by talking a little bit about impatience, which I think is a topic we neglect to talk about. We're always talking about patience. So when we're talking about impatience, what exactly are we talking about? For myself, I think my greatest forms of impatience are frustration and irritation. How about the rest of you? Those are big ones, aren't they? It's important to kind of recognize that impatience is part of our spectrum of anger. So we have all these forms of anger, from very mild forms of anger, again, impatience, frustration, irritation, all the way up to the other side of the spectrum of just crazy anger, blind rage, all of those. So when we try to understand exactly what impatience is, the definition for anger serves us well in this case equally. And we define anger within Buddhism as intolerance of a seen obstacle keeping us from what we want or what we desire. That's how Buddhism defines anger. And if you ponder that, it's quite amazing how it's like the perfect definition for anger. In the West, I think we define anger through other emotions, but I think it's really true that anger and all of the qualities that arise with it, the full spectrum of anger, including impatience, they really do arise when there's something in the way between ourselves and what we want, right? Or the opposite, that there's nothing in the way to all the things we don't want. That can also make us angry and make us very impatient. So I found that one of the greatest places to explore impatience is on the meditation cushion. And the reason being is that in the world, when we're dealing with impatience, usually the stimuli are pretty strong. And so we're already kind of angry, and we're trying to cope with it and try to control our anger. But on the meditation cushion, impatience is really subtle, at the same time really pronounced. So let me explain. So maybe you have had the experience that I've had, and that you're sitting in meditation and you've allotted a certain amount of time, let's say a half an hour to meditate. You've set your timer, right? You set it down, you're cushy, you wiggle your butt around to get nice and comfortable on your cushion. Everything's set, no problems. You start meditating, and within 10 or 15 minutes, all you can think about is getting up off the cushion, right? And for sometimes who knows what reasons, but there's just this imperative, right, to get up, and you try to reason with yourself, and you try to say, no, this is meditation time. I have a half an hour, the timer is still going, there's nothing wrong, just sit still and just relax. And yet that imperative, that feeling is still there, that you want to get up, you want to do something, and this is a really subtle form of impatience, isn't it? It's an anxiety, right? It's an impatience that you simply can't sit there. And you rationalize with yourself and you say, hey, all I'm trying to do is sit here and do nothing. Why, what's so hard about that? But nevertheless, that quality is there, that anxiety, that imperative to do is there on the cushion. So this is a great place to try to explore and try to understand what impatience is. Generally, impatience arises from, or let's say it's fueled by, it arises, again, in the definition, by some type of an obstacle from what we want, or the opposite. But let's say that impatience is fueled by our busyness, our speediness, our exaggerated sense of immediacy and importance. We've talked about this before, right? These qualities I just listed are the qualities that keep us trapped in samsara. They're the qualities that keep us neurotic. When we're calm and things are going well and we feel balanced and stable, these qualities really kind of diminish and disappear, and that's how we feel those qualities. But the opposite, when these qualities arise, no matter what the situation, when we feel that sense of busyness, speediness, that anxiety, that exaggerated sense that whatever it is has to be done right now and it's the most important thing, that really creates a sense of neuroses in us. It really makes us kind of crazy. No matter what activity we're trying to do, and no matter what we're thinking about, it brings with it this nervous neuroses. And so in Buddhism is directly working at limiting that, right, through meditation, through other things. So that's what really kind of exaggerates and fuels our busyness, fuels our impatience, excuse me. And so now we have a little bit of a better idea of what impatience is. But it's also important to recognize that impatience, like many of our qualities, exists in a spectrum, meaning that impatience can be an appropriate action. It can be an appropriate response to certain situations, a lot like anger can be. When a sense of urgency is necessary to accomplish things and tasks and goals, like you have a deadline at work, a little bit of impatience with your coworkers can charge people and create a sense of energetic kind of an energy to do the projects. Meaning that we have to know when it's proper to take actions, right? This impatience is also sometimes appropriate during emergencies, right? Things like that, emergency situations, when it's necessary to act quickly and decisively. Also in the face of needed change, right? We can be patient about things in life, but there is sometimes a point where we realize that the time for being patient is over and we need to become impatient to move forward, especially in the face of preventing violence or injustice. However, it's important to recognize that impatience can also lead to mistakes. Impatience and that neurotic energy that comes with it is a clouded kind of quality. It really clouds our vision and our minds. So if we do believe we need to, that maybe impatience is a productive quality at a certain time, we have to be careful how we use it. So once again, we come back to the notion of spectrums, which we're always talking about with SBT, that to see the world properly is to see the world in spectrums, whether they're physical things or mental things. Things in this world exist in spectrums. Right? And in this case, acknowledging the spectrum between patience and impatience, and how we use wisdom to navigate the potential pros and cons of both qualities. So with that said, let's talk about patience itself. So in the West, I think last time I checked, patience was defined as good-natured tolerance. I thought that was such a great expression. It really is, isn't it? In the Western sense of patience. It's not just tolerance, it's to have a good nature about it, good-natured tolerance. And it's a good-natured tolerance to the undesired, right? What we don't want. It's you trying to smile and put on a good face when you are standing in line of the worst cashier in the whole city. Somehow I always get in her line. She's calling for price checks and she can't figure out how the register works. And I'm just standing there. I'm in robes, so I can't be impatient. Everybody's looking at me, but I'm as red as my robes. And somehow I try to smile. I try to put on my best show. But in Buddhism, as we've talked about before, patience is a little bit different. Patience is considered one of the most important and versatile of all antidotes. But the idea of patience in Buddhism is different. Patience in Buddhism is more akin to non-action, where one is often advised in the sutras that when difficulties arise, when disturbing stimuli arise, we're supposed to become a block of wood, meaning no expression of any kind, right? To just be that block of wood. But what we're really talking about is non-reactivity, right? In the scriptures, they don't talk about it in that sense, but when we talk about becoming a block of wood, we're talking about becoming non-reactive. So what we're talking about here is gaining control over the mind and its reactivity. This is the aspect of patience that benefits us. In most cases, we're talking about emotional overreactivity. There's nothing wrong with reactivity. When a mosquito bites you, you scratch it. That's not going to stop us from becoming enlightened. But when we talk about non-reactivity, we're talking about overreactivity. And oftentimes it's emotional overreactivity, which can arise almost instantaneously upon experiencing stimuli, especially qualities like anger, as we all know. Sometimes anger can come on us so fast we don't see it coming. We don't recognize it until we're deep in that anger. And so it happens so quickly, we have no time to exercise good sense or any kind of self-control, thereby robbing us of the opportunity to respond wisely and skillfully. So this emotional reactivity is something that's spontaneous and impulsive, arising even before we're aware of it. And we're going to talk about some ways to work with that. So again, when we're talking about patience within Buddhism, we're talking more about learning to control our overreactivity. And we have a whole bunch of practices to teach that. And then there's just one more aspect of patience that I wanted to share, and that's that patience is part of the 6 perfections. For those of you who have had Bodhisattva vows or are practicing the Mahayana path, we have the 6 perfections, which are the main practice of the Bodhisattva. And those are the practice of supreme generosity, supreme goodness, supreme patience. Number 3, supreme joyous effort, supreme concentration, and supreme meditation. And I think I got those in the right order. So it's interesting that supreme patience is actually one of the greatest aspects of the Bodhisattva training. Generosity, goodness, and patience, the first 3, right? So it shows us how important it is in Buddhism. Now we have this adjective here when we're talking about not just generosity, goodness, and patience, but we're talking about supreme generosity, goodness, and patience. Oh heavens, what could that mean, right? The idea is that most everybody that are decent folks, we practice these paramitas, right? Most people that are out there that are moms and dads and teachers and workers, we all try to be fairly generous, especially with the ones in our family circle, of friends and family. We try to be generous with friends. We pick up a tab, where of course we're generous with our children and loved ones. Most people are practicing goodness in one form or another, doing their best to do so. And we're all practicing patience. It's a requirement in life, is it not? It's not just something nice to do, like generosity and goodness, but patience is a requirement. We're in situations, whether you're waiting in line somewhere or you're trying to get license plates, whatever it might be. You might be in school, of course at the office, right? Dealing with bosses, dealing with customers. One of the hardest things about all of that is patience with others, right? Because everybody seems to be doing everything in the wrong way, don't they? Except for us, right? So this is this idea of patience. So we're all practicing these qualities. But when we talk about, well, what do you mean by supreme patience? Well, we're talking about these qualities at an enlightened state. So we talk about supreme generosity, supreme goodness, and supreme patience at a Buddha's level or a Bodhisattva's level, or just a great practitioner's level, far above Tenzin Tarpa. What would patience be like for the Buddha? What would his expression of goodness and generosity be like if you were in his presence? So that's what we mean by supreme. And the word really helps me, because when we have those 6 perfections, if I just look at the regular words themselves, you say, yeah, I'm generous, I'm good, I'm patient. But then when you think about that word supreme, it holds me to a much higher level. And so when I'm impatient, behind that cashier that I always seem to get behind, who's the worst cashier in the whole city, I practice supreme patience, and which means I have to be more patient than everybody else in that line. Okay, so these are some aspects of patience. Now, I wanted to see if you had any questions. And before the second part of the teaching, we're going to talk about how to practice patience. So this part, I just wanted to kind of define everything and give everybody a little idea. And I also have some questions for you, but let's start with, does anybody have any questions out there? Could you give that definition again, David, of patience, impatience, anger? Which one, David? You're muted, David.
Yeah, it was anger.
Yeah.
Remember it?
Yeah. And I don't think I didn't write it down word for word, but intolerance of a seen obstacle keeping us from what we want or desire.
Right.
Sure. I always thought it was just so perfect. Does anyone have any questions? I got some questions for you. Okay, my questions are, let's see if I can find them. Can impatience be a positive or productive emotion in certain contexts?
Well, you said to promote productivity, right?
Yeah, that's one thing that it can do. Good job. Any others? I'm quizzing you, see if you were paying attention. David.
I know this wasn't the gist of the thought, but I don't think impatience can ever be a virtue. I think that when you explain it as always, positive action driven by impatience, I think that's positive action maybe, but I don't think that impatience is the best. Or indeed, passion, you mentioned passion the other day. I don't see that passion can ever be positive. Similar kind of analysis.
Yeah, and I think it gets just kind of philosophical depending on how you look at them. But I think if we make it maybe a little bit more extreme, and we go as far as beyond impatience and frustration to anger itself, there's always the great example that anger, as much as we deem it as a generally negative emotion, it does have the potential to motivate us to do good things, like anger in the face of violence or injustice can lead to us acting. And here again, in the next part of the teaching, I was going to talk a little bit about this idea of, is there a point where patience, we take patience too far, we become complacent? And then isn't there a point where we believe we've been patient enough and we become impatient and act? So I think that's all I'll do to defend that, because I think that it can't really be the way you look at it, but I can see yeah.
Yeah, if you take the example of anger, you said anger at perceived injustice driving you to action. I can't get that because what drives you to action is seeing the perceived injustice. You don't need anger in the way to act, and indeed you're more likely to act wisely and with wisdom if anger doesn't get in your way.
Agreed, but the thing about it is that you're going to have an emotion from that injustice or violence that you see, and oftentimes it's anger. And without it, maybe what arises is complacency, and you do nothing about it, and you say to yourself, "Well, it's not my business. I'm not going to do anything." So that's a traditional Buddhist presentation on how anger can be beneficial. Always better to act in a way with limited anger, but the idea is still there that in some situations that anger at injustice can motivate us to get up and do something about it. Just that idea. Sampo?
So is that the difference? When you're acting, you're not acting in anger, but what anger is the actual motivation to act. So
Anger's not a motivation, it's an emotion. The intention, motivation, or volition is secondary. So the anger can push the intention, and so they're not the same thing. They work together. Oh, Jennifer?
It makes me think of, like, if we look at the situation of like Dr. Martin Luther King, who decided to fight injustice with nonviolence. Okay, he used nonviolence, but obviously, if he wasn't angry about the treatment of himself and his people, he would have never got up and done anything about it. Do you know what I'm saying? If he didn't have an anger of the injustice that was taking place, he would never had taken the action to do something about it.
Well said. And so we could be motivated by that anger. We can also choose to not work with that anger. So we can be angry at the injustice. We can recognize that and act like him and the Dalai Lama have done to not act through anger. But nevertheless, anger can be a catalyst to change, to positive change. But it's one we have to be very, very gentle with. Yeah, thank you. That was great.
Would now be share a story, or should I wait till the end?
Is it a short one, Ron?
This has to do with
Your internet connection is breaking up, Ron. Maybe we'll do it at another time, huh? I have a bit to cover.
Oh yeah, I just turned a corner that I usually lose. Yeah, I'll do it later.
Okay. I have another question. How does impatience relate to our expectations and desires? What do you think? I just gave you the answer. Impatience arises when an obstacle falls between us and our desires and what we want, right? Now you'll remember that definition. Is there a difference between patience in Buddhism, non-reactivity, and complacency? And complacency is like a dull satisfaction that lacks a desire to improve or act on issues that arise. So when are we being patient, and when are we simply being complacent and just not doing? Mike.
So one criticism I've heard people say about Buddhism is they talk about people being blissed out or nihilistic and not doing anything, not taking action on things. And I think that's a clear misunderstanding. If you're putting virtuous effort into something, then you obviously want some urgency around it also. And so I don't know if that answers the question or not.
It's a good point. And I guess Thich Nhat Hanh's work dives directly into this, because he seemed to have opinions about where that line is, where he had criticism about the Vietnamese monks having food and staying in their monastery and letting the war go on around them without doing anything. And of course, he starts the engaged Buddhism movement. I think it's a hard question to answer. It's more of a thinking question, because it's quite a delicate line, and doesn't it change according to the person and the circumstances? There is no real place, but I think the question is more of a thinking question. It just allows us to see that it's quite delicate, right? When have we been patient enough and we need to act, right? And I definitely see how People that get really good at patience can get really good at complacency. When you awaken more, it becomes a bit of a problem because there's a bit of you develop a distance between yourself and the world, and you get really good at watching the world go by and watching things. And if you're not careful, that can lead into complacency. And so I think the Bodhisattva vow helps to balance that and gives us that imperative to help others. Oh, you're doing good on the questions. I have a couple more. One last one. How can we differentiate between non-reactivity and suppression of emotion? It's another kind of thinking question. Do you see the spectrum between that, right? To have a wise detachment from the world, we call it objective distance, right? Which please forgive me for what I just said. The whole thing we always say about objective distance is that it's not detachment, it's just becoming more objective. That was a mistake. But where's that difference between being less reactive and suppressing emotions?
So is that the difference between not being angry or just acting like you're not angry? Like maybe you're not like showing it outwardly, but you still are holding that anger within you?
Or just what level of emotion do we hold? Like the anger can be there, but where is that appropriate anger? And it could be our positive qualities as well. When you get more objective and you start to watch the world more, even our benevolent qualities like love and care aren't as obvious, even though they might still be very strong within us, you know? So again, I'm trying to paint this picture for you that, again, we have this spectrum. And again, there's not really an answer. It's really so much up to each one of us individually. You know, how emotional should we be? How much should we share our emotions and have signs of it? I'm a happy, jolly, laughing monk. Some people seem to really like it. There's a few people that don't care for it. I often get criticized for just being a little too joyful. So, yeah. But you're starting to see it. This isn't so easy, is it? Mike.
So to that point, I remember seeing a video with the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu together. And the Dalai Lama was cutting up and acting silly and tickling people and stuff like that. And Desmond Tutu looked at him and told him that wasn't dignified for his position in life. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and he kept on looking over and saying, "Act like a holy man." Yeah, and yeah, I did too. I found that that was very useful for me. Kind of gives me permission to be as silly as I want to be. Damn it. Yeah. Darcy was saying that there's so many things that we need to act on now, but I think we need to act with wisdom always, right? If not for the action, we wouldn't see some of the changes that are happening, even slowly. Yeah, that's the idea. And then within that, you also have to bring in the other ideas, is that simply we can't do everything, right? It takes a village to benefit the world. We can help where we can. You have to, a lot like the last two questions I asked, so much of it is personal. It's up to you to find out where and how you act upon the world. Some people focus on a lot of little things. Some people do big things. And again, it's up to you to decide whether to act or not. There is no law that says Darcy has to act upon the world to improve the world. We do so because we believe it to be a beneficial thing. In Buddhism, we do so because we realize that it benefits us greatly. But these are all personal choices. Oh, very good. Oh, I really enjoyed all your ideas. So I'd like to talk about now cultivating patience. And we've talked about this quite a bit in the past, so I don't want to bore anybody, but there's just a handful of, I'm going to stick with more traditional Buddhist ideas of cultivating patience. Boy, you can do a search, or you can get on YouTube, and there's a million videos telling you how to practice patience. And I'm sure all of you have your own little tricks. Count to 10 or kick the dog or something. Everybody has their ways of cultivating patience. But I think that meditation and mindfulness are often really overlooked in their ability to cultivate patience. Of course, the meditation and mindfulness are related to patience, but I'm always surprised with how little we really talk about it when we talk about meditation. When you go to a class, when you hear people talk about it, it's rare that people will say that one of the great advantages to meditation is that it teaches patience. And it's extraordinary in the way that it does it. In the practices of these mindfulness and meditation, we learn to recognize the space and length between thoughts. We learn to recognize the space between stimuli and reactivity. These practices give us space to allow wisdom and skills to be applied. And like I mentioned before, on how impatience is such a fascinating thing to work with on the meditation cushion, because it's such a subtle impatience, and there are no stimuli. It's just simply us not wanting to sit there. Equally true, patience is an amazing thing to practice on the cushion in that same way, right? We sit there and we try to decide, why do I want to get up? We learn how to do things like breathe into the feeling, that anxiety. We learn how to generate patience on the meditation cushion. So I think when you're aware of that, and you're aware of one of the great benefits of meditation and mindfulness is patience, then it becomes an extraordinary tool for cultivating it. It's through calming and slowing down that we gain patience. Again, what really fuels and feeds patience is that speediness, that busyness, that sense of immediacy and importance. So when we simply slow down, calm down, no matter how you do it, whether you like reading books, you like to do a little cooking, meditation, whatever it is, the more we slow down, the more we calm down, patience arises automatically through it. Secondly, the cultivation of presence and objective distance. We've talked about this in our Skillful Living program. By training ourselves to be present and objective and reducing our over-emotional reactivity, when problems do occur, we react softer to them. Meaning, when we practice being present, if we could be present before stimuli arises, we're already halfway there. And of course, one of the great practices we have for this is the 4 steps of acceptance. So the 4 steps of acceptance do a few things for us. First of all, it's perfect instructions for how to be present and how to work with these things that arise. So first, we have presence itself. This means being present, objective, and non-reactive. We do it by focusing on our breath, body, or senses. That's probably the easiest way to become present. We become objective and non-reactive by separating our feelings from observations. I often talk about it being like a camera lens, where we just take in the world without judgment, without feelings. We save that for a later time in the process. And then we apply objective distance from what we observe by just mentally taking a step back from what's happening. And again, be more of an observer. And then once we become present, then we just accept what's before our eyes. We don't have to like it. We just accept it. We acknowledge and embrace the reality of the situation. I don't like it, but this is happening. This is real. And then we go into the third step, which is assessment, applying reason to gain perspective and understanding. And this is done in the form of a conversation with yourself, a dialogue in which you use your reason to understand things. I like to start with the biggest ideas, the biggest concepts, and then work my way smaller. Well, the first thing, I assess the situation within its broadest context. And this is often, for me, it's historical and things like that, but I look at the big picture and try to gain clarity in it. And then I start to work smaller. Then I'll assess the feelings related to the situation. Now, you notice at this point, this is what we stopped from ourselves from doing in the first step. We became objective. We became that camera lens. We set aside our feelings and just observe what's happening. Well, here we have a chance to look at our feelings and assess them in the situation. And then we assess the best way for dealing with it or not dealing with it. And if there is a way to deal with it, number 4 is action. If moved, we act to improve the situation. So in a lot of ways, this is a really valuable way of practicing patience. So something happens, your daughter comes home with a punk rocker with a 3-foot mohawk and tattoos all over his face, and you think, oh my goodness, what's happening? First thing you do is you become present. You take a few deep breaths. Now, what's interesting about the 4 steps is that people don't recognize that most people, you're already doing these. You just don't recognize it. You know, when there's a problem, what do? We all take a breath, right? We all take a couple breaths. Oh my God. And so we all become present through that breath. Most of us don't accept it though. Number 2, we don't do. Most of us don't accept it. We go right into trying to understand it. So here we have acceptance. Number 3, we use that dialogue to try to rationalize things. You know, where did I go wrong raising this child? You know, all those thoughts go through your mind. And then of course, at the end, we all act or don't act according to that. So the 4 steps of acceptance are a wonderful vehicle for practicing patience. I'll put these up on our social media after the teaching. And of course, we have this wonderful acronym for you, which is PAA. And it's presence, acceptance, assessment, and action. PAA. You'll never forget it again. It's a joke, by the way. We couldn't think of a good acronym, so we thought, why not make the stupidest one we could think of? So we always say PAA. So that's a great one. I'll post this for everybody. Okay, so now let's dig into the deep stuff. So by far, the greatest way of cultivating patience and working with this is the best way for dealing with anything in Buddhism. And it's simply the development of right view. The development of right view is the difference between enlightenment and unenlightenment. It's the remedy, the antidote to all things in our lives that give us trouble. And the idea of right view, it's that understanding of how life works and why we do the things we do, right? Understanding who and what we are, understanding our environment, others, understanding reality, right? This is right view. Through that right view and understanding of the world, frustration and impatience simply don't arise. In a sense, when we have right view, there are rarely times that we need to practice patience. These situations and are are understood and even expected. So with right view, these things that arise in life that we usually would be impatient about, they're already understood and even expected. So now we're at the grocery store, and I can't wait to hear Ron's story. We're at the grocery store, we're behind the lady at the counter, the cashier or the man, and normally we're impatient, but with right view, you understand that no, this is how things work. This is always going to arise. This is the nature of the world. Some people are great at their jobs. There's always going to be people that aren't good at their jobs, that create trouble. So you actually begin to expect these things in life, and they're not difficulties or not difficulties. They're simply experience. At the highest levels of practice, this idea of good and bad, like and dislike, the things we need to be patient with, they just start to lessen more and more. And you just see experiences as what they truly are, just experiences. It's up to us to label them in our mind, whether they're like, not like, good or bad. And so as that lessens, patience is just there automatically. You end up in such a content state that you find that you rarely need to really practice patience. So that's by far the greatest thing to do. And of course, right view is what our whole skillful living program is geared towards, and all of Buddhism. Right view can be thought of as synonymous with nirvana, or enlightenment itself, at its highest level, experienced at a direct experiential level. So, do you see how meditation and mindfulness are amazing practices for cultivating patience? And isn't it true that people don't talk about it that much? Even in our own skillful living program, I found myself kind of guilty of that. How much do we really talk about that, and how important the practice of patience is? Oftentimes it's kind of just something, oh yeah, be patient, We never look at patience as a catalyst of awakening, right? And we never think that maybe that's the real goal of meditation. Anyways, maybe it's just to develop supreme patience, which would be a supreme clarity, right? Any thoughts? What are some techniques that can help us to develop patience? I listed a couple. Maybe some of you, Mike?
Well, I just wanted to comment. You listed the 4 steps of acceptance, and I think what I have experienced is if you do that, and then what you come up with is what's the next right thing to do, and then you just embrace that, and the rest of it just falls into place.
I agree. If I understand you correctly, yeah, that's right. Darcy?
Well, my patience has gotten so much better since last year before I joined. I have found, I have my moments, but I think that part of being patient is having compassion, because you never know why this person behind the counter is having that bad day. And if they do it over and over and over again, there must be a reason that they just can't grasp something about their job or whatever. But in every situation, trying to have compassion, I think, helps to accept. Yeah, that's it.
And how do we cultivate compassion?
I'm not sure how I do it. I have a lot of compassion.
We do it through understanding.
Yes.
We do it by understanding that person, realizing that they're human beings just like we are. And so again, we come back to understanding is is really how we develop all of our qualities, but especially patience, by understanding that cashier. Maybe it's her first day. I keep saying her, I'm sorry about that. I've been behind slow male cashiers as well. I guess at Walmart, there's this one lady that really always, I'm thinking of in the back of my head. But nevertheless, understanding right view is really where all of this comes from. Great. And do you guys remember some of the things we talked about? What were some of the ways of developing patience? Number one, I know the answers. And I'm not looking at my notes. Meditation, remember? Meditational mindfulness, that's a great one. Number two,
Right view.
Presence and objectivity, right? Practicing the 4 steps of acceptance. Number 3. Now I have to look up my notes. Was there only 3? Yeah, I think 3. Number 3 was developing right view. And that might sound kind of clinical. Developing a right view, what does that mean? It means learning about who you are, what you are, learning about your fellow human beings, learning about human behavior, learning about your environment, how life works, how reality works. Right view is just right understanding of your life. Yeah. To see through the illusion of separateness. Well, that depends on the school you're in, Ron. Buddhism doesn't have a problem with separateness. We are pluralists. So we believe that we are separate, but interdependent. So that's a little different take. Okay, you're doing so good with the questions. Let's ask another one. How can we deal with impatience when it arises in ourselves and in others? We've been addressing this so far by looking at our own impatience. What about dealing with other people's impatience? That's a tough one, huh?
Is that then about our reactivity? And so then going back to the 4 stages of acceptance.
And their reactivity, right?
Yeah. But
yeah.
I'm just thinking for the 4 stages of acceptance, you're then react.
Yeah, it works for everything. You're right. Yeah. But when we deal with other people's impatience, again, we come back to right view, try to understand the person, try to understand the situation. No, it's temporary, impermanence, things like that.
Back to your question before about complacency. If you're going through the 4 stages of acceptance, if you're using right view, then you're not being complacent because you're actually very active in what you're doing and very meaningful in what you're doing. So you're not being complacent. Because
well said. Well said. I agree. And I guess I have a thought on that as well, that complacency really has a lot to do with volition, right? Our intentional action, volition. And so complacency, we can see somebody sitting on the couch and deem the person complacent, but actually it really has more to do with what our intentions are doing. Because to decide that something isn't your problem, and maybe it's better for those people to work it out on their own, that's not complacent, but it's also non-action, right? That could be a really wise thing to do, to ignore it and let those people work it out. So yeah, complacency is very much about our volition. Thank you, Sampo. Very wise. Oh, wonderful. Such a smart Sangha. But again, well, let's talk about this. Can patience be overdone? Are there situations where impatience may be better and more appropriate than patience? A question for you, David.
Well, you know what I would say. what moves you to action in a situation that's you see as unjust, is or could be and should be your compassion rather than your anger or impatience. That's how I
Compassion often leads to feelings of anger. If I feel for you and I see someone hurting you, that could easily lead to anger, which would motivate me.
It can lead to anger. My disagreement with what you just said is that it doesn't need to lead to anger to motivate you. Simply seeing the wrongness of it and your compassion for that person in that situation can move you to action, and probably in a more rational and wise way than if driven by your anger.
Yeah, I see that point. I didn't mean to imply that it was the only way to arise. My point is that there are better reasons and intentions and volitions and emotions to act upon. But here we were just saying that in some cases, even though other ways would be better, there can be positive outcomes to impatience or anger. But I think I agree with you. Other qualities would be much more welcome than that would be. To act out of care, to act out of love, to act out of a sense of justice. But yeah, and again, we often talk about that. We rarely experience one emotion at a time. We always, whatever it is, we're always experiencing an ocean of emotions. If you learn, you develop a subtler awareness, you see them arise as in like a big wash of emotions, and we notice the most prominent one. And in situations like that, like compassion, oftentimes what motivates us in compassion can, not often much, but can be anger, or it can be all kinds of other emotions that work with that compassion. So I get what you're saying. Gilwa was saying in ICU medicine, just holding someone's hand and letting them know you're there and they're being heard is enough to work with anger and impatience. Thank you, Gilwa. That's a beautiful thought. It's so true to just let people know they're being heard, let them express their impatience. Yeah, I agree. That's lovely. Thanks for mentioning that. Those are all the questions I have for you. Does anybody have any final questions? I want to hear Ron's story of the cashier.
Okay, so I forget exactly who shared this story with me or where I heard it, but there was a woman, and I'm pretty sure it was a woman who this happened to, but I could be mistaken. And she was in a grocery line. And I think she was pressed to be somewhere, and she was so proud of her newfound mindfulness and meditation. And she made her mind up to be mindful the whole day. And but she had to be somewhere. And she got in the express lane at the grocery store, the 10 items or less. And the woman was in front of her with a grocery cart, clearly with more than 10, and a lot more than 10 apparently, and a baby in the cart. And so the woman started to feel her impatience coming on. Like, why is this woman doing this? And the cashier wasn't very fast and clearly a little distracted. And then after she finally rings everything up, she hands the cashier the baby. And the woman is like, oh no, this is taking longer now. Why is she handing her this baby? And the cashier plays with the baby a bit, hands the baby back, and the woman leaves. And she finally gets there, and the cashier apologizes to the woman for taking so long. And she says, my husband was just killed unexpectedly last week. And that was my mother-in-law. She comes through every day so I can see my baby because I have to work. And it just, stories like that bring me back to never judge.
Mm-hmm.
And they bring us back to right view and understanding. So you at the point you might be angry in line because of that, but then as soon as you hear that story, what happens? You say, "Oh, I didn't know," and all that anger that was in you just evaporates because now you understand. Thank you, Ron. That was a lovely story. I'd like to wrap us, we're running a little late. I'd like to wrap us up with a little conclusion here. So impatience is a common emotion that arises from, that arises from, but is more fueled by our busyness, speediness, exaggerated sense of immediacy and importance. However, through practices such as meditation, mindfulness, presence, and objective distance, we can cultivate patience in the face of our challenges. But probably most effective, both short-term and long-term, is the development of right view. That through developing right view and a better understanding of ourselves, our lives, and human behavior, we reduce ignorance, confusion, frustration, and impatience. In the end, cultivating patience requires practice and patience with ourselves. By gaining control over our minds and our reactivity, we can respond wisely and skillfully to challenging situations, leading to a more fulfilling and harmonious life. And of course, the ultimate aim is to awaken itself. So I want to thank everybody for coming. It was a great topic. Thank you, Darcy, for recommending this lovely topic. We have a nice quiet week ahead of us because I'm still on holiday over here in the UK. And we'll have another teaching this Sunday coming up. Our daily meditations are still on, but I do believe Wednesday I might have to cancel because my flight might get in the way of that. But nevertheless, let's end today's class with our altruistic affirmation. May all be healthy, may all be prosperous, may all be well, may all be present, free of past regret and future worry. May all abide in constant appreciation, which is a source of great joy and contentment. May all realize their true nature and the true nature of reality, which is awakening, which is right view, understanding. Thank you all for coming. Remember that the SBT community was created for one purpose and one purpose only, to support you, the practitioner. See you tomorrow.
Thank you, Tarpa. That was wonderful.
Great session.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.